Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome to the show Anne-Laure. She's the author of Tiny Experiments, How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World, and the founder of Nest Labs. In this conversation, we're talking about how to break free from the linear, goal-oriented mindset that often leads to burnout and frustration, and she shares how adopting an experimental approach to life and goals, where you focus on the process and learning rather than fixed outcomes, helps you discover what truly excites you and leads to true growth. We also discuss how to shift from the productivity-driven Kronos mindset to a more meaningful, flexible Kairos approach to time. So if you're looking for a fresh perspective on goal setting and productivity, this conversation with Anne-Laure is for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Anne-Laure, and welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so interested in your journey when it comes to this new book, Tiny Experiments, How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. If there's anything that I can kind of say here is listeners of this show are definitely on board with, yes, the world is goal-obsessed, and we like to set goals, but we don't think everybody does it the same way or the right way. I'm curious, let's start there. You say that essentially goal setting is broken. What do you mean by that?
The type of goals I'm talking about are what I call linear goals. And this is a definition of goal setting in which you have a very clear definition of what success is supposed to look like. And so you have this clear vision, a clear plan, and then you work really hard to get there. But this is based on so many assumptions. It's based on the assumption that you know where you want to go. It's based on the assumption that whatever you want today is the same thing you will want tomorrow. It's based on the assumption that the world is not changing and that you're going through those goals and those tasks in a vacuum. And it is also very often based on the assumption that once you get there, everything is going to be okay. You'll be happy. What psychologists call the arrival fallacy. So that's what I mean by goal setting is broken. A lot of us are attaching our sense of success and our sense of self-worth also to reaching these goals that are either impossible to reach because of everything I just mentioned and all of the assumptions, or even if we do manage to reach them, we end up being disappointed when we realize that, happiness was not hiding on the other side of that milestone. I'm still the same person I was. My problems are still here. Nothing has changed. And so the traditional approach to goal setting, this very linear approach with the clear vision and the clear plan, are actually making us quite unhappy.
Yeah. And I think the other key is that, we're living in this world where there's no real certainty. I mean, we can make assumptions, we can make plans. Again, I'm dancing around with words that are related to experimentation. We have data, we have hypotheses, and we have theories and all those kinds of things. So speaking of experiments, you started this whole journey with this book. The book was born out of a newsletter, which was born out of a place in your life where you felt a bit lost and decided to go back to school for neuroscience. That was a whole process. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the first part of my career was very linear and driven by this linear definition of success we just talked about. I was working at Google. I had a very clear vision of what success looked like. And I was very focused on climbing the ladder, the next promotion, the next big project. I quit my job at Google after realizing that something felt off. I was a bit burned out and bored out at the same time. I felt like I know exactly where I was going. I also had a health scare around the same time. So an accumulation of events that triggered the need for a change. What I didn't realize at the time is that I stopped following one script to start following the next sanctified script in my industry. So I quit Google to start a startup because that's what everybody was doing around me. And it took me a while to realize that I was, again, not really creating my own definition of success. I was following whatever path to success, the linear approach that everybody around me was having. It's only in that second chapter of my career when I accepted the fact that I was completely lost, that for the first time in my life, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a vision. I didn't know what kind of success I wanted, that I went back to the drawing board and I finally asked myself, what is it you're curious about? What is something you'd like to do, you'd like to explore, even if nobody was watching, even if money was out of the equation, even if recognition, validation from your peers, what would be something you'd be excited to wake up in the morning and explore in and of itself? And for me, that was the brain. I had always been fascinated with the brain and what we think the way we think and feel the way we feel. So I decided, as you mentioned, to go back to school to study neuroscience. And this is where I rediscovered the scientific method, this experimental approach where instead of having a clear goal, a clear outcome, a binary definition of success, you start from a hypothesis, from a research question. You're actually not quite sure it's going to work. And that's why you run the experiment. And that was an aha moment for me of really redefining my relationship to success. And instead of focusing on a specific outcome, focusing on the process itself, on learning, showing up, collecting data, and integrating failure as part of the process, as part of this process of growth. And my first experiment was the newsletter that I started, where I said, I'm going to write, which was not, the title of my book is Tiny Experiments. This was not a tiny experiment. It was a big one. I said, I'm going to write 100 articles for the next 100 weekdays. And that was an experiment because it had a test, writing the newsletter. It had a number of trials that I committed to before I got started. And I decided to withhold judgment until I was done. I said, I'm just going to write these. And when I'm done, I'll decide whether I liked it and whether I want to keep going, or maybe I hated it and I can stop. That was the first time I ran an experiment in my life.
I don't know that I've shared this on the show before, but my grandfather was a research scientist at the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. It's a pretty big thing. And I always, so it was always kind of fun for me to go in and see him, visit him at his work. And he was wearing his white lab coat and he would show us little Petri dishes and like you'd look through the microscope and all that kind of fun stuff. And of course that spilled over into the rest of his life. It kind of feels like this experimentation philosophy now has spilled over into not just the brain, but like all of life for you as well.
Exactly. It's really when I started to apply this mindset to everything in my life, it completely wired my relationship to success and failure, to also uncertainty and anxiety. Now, whenever I face something that I don't quite understand or that looks a little bit scary, the fear is still here. It's not like it's gone, but I notice it and I almost see it as a signal that there might be something interesting to explore here. And so whenever I'm in front of something new, I ask myself, what can I learn from this? So it has really completely changed my approach to the way I work, my career, even my relationships, the way I manage my health, everything.
Yeah. I love the way that you approach mindful productivity. And I especially love the way that you approach this kind of commitment to curiosity, that where we've all got it stuck in our head. Sometimes we think, oh, what's my life's purpose? My only thing that I should be focused on. When I can find that, then I'll be ultimately happy, as you were kind of talking about earlier. And instead, it's not. I think we all kind of know this, but we've bought into the lie of, no, there is the one thing. But we also know now that we move from thing to thing to thing throughout our journey through life. And so we have to hold things a little less tight and a little less precious. It's okay to doubt, to allow ourselves to wander, be curious, and gather more data.
Absolutely. There's a little graph in my book that when I saw it, I was so shocked, which shows that the number of mentions of find your purpose has grown 700% in the past 2 decades. So people have become obsessed with this idea of finding that one purpose in life. And it makes us feel miserable when we think that other people have found it and we haven't. So we feel like, oh, how come I haven't found my purpose yet? So that's one problem. And the other problem, which you just described also, is that because we think that we're supposed to focus on one purpose, we don't allow ourselves to explore other areas of curiosity, where we don't allow ourselves to explore opportunities that might seem like distractions in the present moment, but that might actually be new doors to new projects, new collaborations, new areas of growth and learning that are kind of hard to predict because they're more emergent. So it's so important to really understand, embody, and really believe that first, you don't have to find your one true purpose. Second, you can have several of them. You can have the purpose of being an amazing developer, of being a great dad and an amazing friend, and also learning how to paint. That's great. So small p purpose. And also your purpose, purposes, plural, can change. You can actually decide that you're done with something, that this is something that made you feel really alive and excited and connected and creative for a period of your life. But now maybe this is a new season. And that was great. You learned a lot, but now you're ready to move on and explore something new.
And that's totally okay. Allowing ourselves to have that permission, I think, is something we often kind of hold back from. I know in the book you talk about some examples of famous people who didn't explored and experimented and had other interests, and they ultimately landed on something else, although landing is probably not the right word here.
It's actually interesting because if you ask people who are quite happy in whatever work they're doing right now, and you ask them, you look quite happy, like, how did you figure out that this was your thing? None of them will tell you that they spent an hour filling a worksheet, answering questions, and that's how they figured out that was their thing. The way people figure out their thing is by trying things, by actually working on different projects, collaborating with different people. And if they answer this question honestly, they'll tell you, you know what, I actually was approached by this random person who asked if I could help with this. And then I connected with this other person, which led to this other project. And then I started working on this. And one morning I woke up and I was like, wait a minute. I'm actually really excited about what I'm working on right now. This is great. And so these people who have found their thing, they first know that this is not something you can engineer. It is the product of actually putting yourself out there, trying different things. It's a messy process. And second, they know that this is not fixed, that they might meet a new person tomorrow, get to work on a new project, discover a new technology that they're super excited about. We're seeing that with AI right now. It's hilarious. People who have been working in a specific industry for years have started playing with AI, and they're so excited about it that they're literally jumping ship and just starting working on AI products right now, which is great because this is where their sense of curiosity is calling them right now. And that's completely okay. So first, figuring out your thing is messy. Second, once you figured out your thing, it doesn't have to be your thing for the rest of your life.
And so this figuring out, this constant, it sounds like a negative when I say this constant figuring it out. That's kind of like, oh, you're on a treadmill and you're never going to get off. No, it's more like if hiking's your thing, go with that metaphor. If it's not, then insert taking a nice walk with the dogs or a friend or something. But it's wandering, it's shopping in the mall is another metaphor, I guess. You can stop at any store you want to. You can go to all of them. You can stop and eat. You have so many options and you aren't limited Maybe you are by time and space, but not by curiosity. So I guess my question is since the book is called Tiny Experiments, how do we start to do these experiments? Experiment sounds like this big word that like, oh, I've got to get a spreadsheet and I got to start writing things down and tracking things. And it sounds like a lot of homework, but it's tiny. So it's got to be more simple.
Absolutely. So the first part is just observation. Any kind of experiment starts with observation. And I know for people who want to be productive and who're very good at getting things done, you might be excited and you want to rush and start designing your first experiment. But it is really important for you to be able to imagine what might be to first understand how things are currently. So what I recommend doing is just spending 24 hours observing your current life. And that does require, I think it is helpful, taking little notes, but not in a way where you have a spreadsheet or anything like this. You can do it on your phone. It doesn't have to be complicated, but just noting when things that give you energy, things that drain your energy, topics that make you perk up. If you hear someone talking about something and you feel quite excited and you could talk about it for hours, just take a little note. Like, this topic is interesting to me right now. Or the opposite. Every time someone mentions something, you just want to run away or fall asleep. Take a little note. This is interesting too, right? Another thing you can do in those 24 hours of observation is just opening your calendar and doing a very honest assessment, how you spend your time and what do you like, what do you not like. And so you could look at meetings and say, oh, actually, I look forward to this meeting every week. Those are really good conversations. Intellectually stimulating, love it. Or I'm dreading this one every week. I like giving presentations. I actually like listening. Take little notes. Observation, 24 hours. Once you do this, and it's the case with everyone I've done this exercise with, you already start noticing things that could be different. Things that you've been doing in a very routine-like manner, not really asking yourself why you're doing things. You've just been doing them this way. And you can start asking yourself, why am I working this way? Why is my calendar organized like this? Why do I attend this meeting every week? Why am I curious about this? Why? And that's when you can start formulating a hypothesis. And you can use a magic word, which is maybe. Maybe if I did that thing differently, I would be more energized. Maybe if I did my most important work in the morning, I would be more creative or I would be more productive. Maybe I would enjoy taking a training to learn about the specific tool that could be helpful to me. Maybe. Pick one thing, keep it small. There is a temptation to go big with our first experiment. But again, it's tiny experiments. Pick something really small. You can run experiments over the course of 5 days, 2 weeks. It doesn't have to be really big. Once you've picked something, you have to decide on a specific action and a specific duration. And so you say, I'm going to do this thing for this specific duration. So for example, I'm going to block 1 hour of quiet work in my calendar for 5 days. First thing in the morning, 9 to 10, 1 hour of quiet work. Or you could say, I'm going to take a lunch walk every day for 2 weeks. That's another tiny experiment. Every time you have the action and the duration, then you do it. You just do it. And you withhold judgment. You're not analyzing the data while you're doing it. You just do it. So you do your daily walks for 2 weeks, or you do your 1 hour of quiet work in the morning for the duration you decided. And only at the end, you look back. And again, very honestly, you ask yourself, how did that feel? Was that good? Was that difficult? Did I struggle to stick to it? Do I want to keep going, or did I hate this? Not for me. Let's try something else. And this is really, in essence, what running tiny experiments are. It's starting with maybe things could be different, then trying something different, and then asking yourself, was it worth it? Do I want to keep going? Did that work or not?
Now, what if we set a duration of, I'm going to do the 2 weeks of weekday lunch walks. Let's choose that one, hypothetically. What if by day 3, I think, I'm not sure about this. Like, should we give ourselves permission to pause and maybe say, okay, let's reconfigure or come up with a new version of it?
Ideally, you keep going until the end. And this is why it's important to design tiny experiments, because they're very, very often with the kind of things we want to experiment with that require a little bit of behavior change. Mm-hmm. It can be a little bit hard at the beginning. Doesn't mean it's not worth it. Doesn't mean it's not going to be beneficial. And so that's why you make what I call a pact. It's really a commitment to running the experiment. And you say, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks. If you feel like it's going to be difficult, just commit to 5 days. But whatever you commit to, you finish it. You finish it. And then at the end, you decide whether that was good or not. With this example, actually, if you quit after 3 days, you might not know if it's good for you. Maybe 3 days is not enough. So it's very important to finish it. However, by finishing it, I don't mean that you need to do it every day, because you might miss some days. That's also part of collecting data. So you finish the 2 weeks, and if at the end of the 2 weeks you realize that you did it only 5 times, that's actually very interesting data. That was really hard for you to stick to this. So maybe if your experiment was around figuring out a way to move your body more, maybe that's not it. Maybe taking walks is not the right one, or maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe for the next iteration, you want to do it with a friend. Maybe walking is not something you like. Maybe you should try dance classes instead, or yoga or something else that might be more enjoyable. And in that sense, there's no failure. You're just collecting data. And so if at the end of the experiment, you realize, those lunch walks, not for me. Now you know, because you've completed the experiment, and now you can try something different.
Yeah, there's no wasted experience or wasted data collection. It's all new information that's added into what you've already had, and now you can make another hypothesis and another experiment.
Exactly. So the objective here is not to get to a specific destination. It's not success in a traditional sense of the term. The only aim you have here is to learn something new, whether that's about yourself, your work, or the world. As long as you learn something new, the experiment is successful.
One of the things that I like that you talk about, and because I love talking about the brain and how we perceive things and how we think, which is a lot of what the things are that are in your newsletter, learning about learning. One of the other things in the book that really stood out to me that I love is talking about time. I love time travel and perception of time. And so you talk about having this deeper sense of time. And that's another one of the things that, like, having that pact does for you. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was fascinated to discover that the ancient Greeks didn't have one word for time. They had 2 words for it. The first one is the one we actually use in our language, and that has inspired a lot of the way we relate to time, and it's Kronos. That's what you see in chronometer and a lot of words around time. This is the quantitative definition of time. It's the time of seconds, of minutes, of hours. And it comes with the idea that time is a series of equally sized boxes that you have to stuff with as much work as possible, or business or activity as possible, in order to make the most of your time. And you don't want to waste your time. You want to be intentional with the way you spend your time. All of this language is very quantitative. That's Kronos. And this is a big reason why we have such a toxic relationship to productivity. Because again, you have this finite number of tiny boxes where you need to stuff as much stuff as possible in it. You need to be as productive as possible. They had a second word for time, which is Kairos. And Kairos is the qualitative definition of time. It's the idea that time is not a series of equally sized boxes, but it can expand and it can contract. There's a different quality to each moment. And in a less philosophical, conceptual way, I think one of the best examples, we've all experienced this. You know, when you have an amazing conversation with a friend and you check your phone or your watch and you say, oh, where has the time gone? Because that was so good that you were so lost in this conversation that you completely lost track of time. This is a Kairos moment. And it really shows you that our experience of time is elastic. And that relates to a lot of what we've talked about in the sense that we can be a lot more intentional with the way we relate to time. That means that in some moments, spending time with your kids, for example, might be more important than finishing that presentation. In other moments, you actually want to be in deep focused work and have nobody talk to you because you're losing yourself in incredible work that is giving you a lot of energy. There might be moments that go very fast, moments that go very slow, and you should really not treat time as if it was a to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a lot of the people, again, people that are focused on productivity come to it with, and even most recently, I had a conversation with Oliver Berkman, who talks about 4,000 weeks, and then he has a second book. One of the things a term he brings up in there is this, what does he call it? Productivity debt, where we come into the day already owing so much of this. There's this big load of stuff that's weighing on us that we have to do that was probably carried over from before, and that it's in a sense infinite. There's always more to do. And so I relate that kind of to what you talk about in the book, where you talk about time anxiety.
Yes. Yeah. Time anxiety is the feeling that we're wasting our time. It's the feeling that we're never doing enough, and the feeling that it's too late. Mm-hmm. It's too late to start something new, too late to learn a new skill, too late to change careers, too late to move to a new place. And because of time anxiety, there are a lot of things we don't do, we don't start, we don't allow ourselves to explore because it would be a waste of time. Better to focus on whatever we're doing right now that is working and that we know, rather than wasting our time exploring something new, risky, and different. And this is something I have suffered from so many times, and it still happens to me sometimes, where I can tell I'm curious about something, but I feel like, oh, come on, like, you're not going to start this now. This is something most kids start studying this thing when they're 14, 13. Like, what are you doing? I have to catch myself. And I have to do this work of reminding myself that it's never too late to learn something new. So even with that knowledge, it takes work to remind myself that I am allowed to start something new, that it's never too late. Time anxiety is really something that's very, very hard to deal with. And I'm not fully convinced you can completely rid yourself of it.
Well, because we live in a world that's focused on that first word of Kronos. And so yes, there is a ticking clock. We were talking previously before recording about the time change that just recently happened. And so, but what's funny is some parts of the world change it at some times and some other parts of the world change it at others. So there's time zones, but they're not always in sync, even in their unsynchronizedness, which is funny to say because I don't think that's a word, but it's all perception. It's already all perception. But you get to choose how to perceive it.
And just look at our calendars. That metaphor that I used of little boxes that we need to fill with stuff. This is literally what our calendars look like. Little boxes that we need to fill with stuff. And there's this sense that the more stuff is in there, the more productive we are, which is not true at all.
It's not about how many of those boxes you have. It's that, did you do them all? Which I think goes one step towards talking about it the right way, but we're still talking about, I have to check, I've limited the boxes down. I've made them smaller and fewer, but I'm still focused on checking them off. It's still kind of quantitative instead of qualitative.
Yeah. And this is really what shifting from Kronos to Kairos is all about. So first, I do want to acknowledge that because we live in a Kronos society, it's not like you can change that. This is literally how we set up meetings. This is how we align with each other in terms of deadlines and project management. So we live in a Kronos society. What you can do at an individual level is try to make sure that you have space for Kairos moments in your life, that not all of your life is dictated by Kronos, and that you have those in-between moments that follow more of a Kairos approach, where you optimize not for the quantity of work that you're doing, but for the quality of the experience. And so give yourself these moments of either working on something that has nothing to do with the current project you're working on, just something you've been curious about, pure pleasure. Go and fall into that Wikipedia rabbit hole. Read that thing that you've been meaning to read that doesn't connect to anything else, just for pure fun. Allow yourself also to do nothing. Take that walk, go and walk around the block, buy a nice little coffee, look around, look at the sky, look at people, how they dress. Like take those 15 minutes before getting back to work in front of your computer. And whenever you're having conversations with friends and colleagues, maybe put your phone away, be fully present, create that Kairos moment by really connecting with the person in front of you.
I couldn't help but think of this kind of structure of Kronos and having those moments inside of it. I'm thinking of the calendar. I'm thinking of boxes, and two sci-fi genres came to mind. Doctor Who, where you go into the TARDIS and it's bigger inside than it was from the outside. But I also thought of Star Trek, where you've got the holodeck, where you can go into that confined space, but then it's expansive and you can go anywhere in it. And so it's kind of having, you still we live within Kronos, but we have those set times and places of Kairos that we can explore. And as long as we have like a regularity, it allows them to play well together, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also something that I try to make very clear in my work when I talk about linear goals versus an experimental approach, is that, again, we have to recognize that a lot of the work we do, and especially in bigger companies, are designed around linear goals, KPIs, OKRs, whatever you want to call them. And this is not like you're going to be able to overhaul all of this, right? If you're part of that system, then this is just the way it works. And this is how teams are aligning at different levels. But you can make space for experimentation in some areas of your work. What does that look like for you? What is a tiny experiment that you can run? And so very similar to what you're describing for Kairos within Kronos, you can actually be experimental within a more linear environment.
Yeah, that's almost a nice little experiment right there. Is what if I decide, okay, so let's real time talk this through. You can coach me through it. Say I want to daily have a practice where I don't look at the clock. I don't think about time passing, but I allow my mind to wander. And I'm not talking about, you could use an experiment where you talk about or do actual meditation. In fact, I know that's one of the things that you did experiment with, and we could talk about that in a second, actually. But let's say I'm not going to just sit in a room, put a blindfold on and just let my mind wander. I want to do something fun. I want to encourage my Kairos curiosity, let's call it that. So let's start with something small so I don't feel, air quotes, guilty about doing it, but I want to do it enough times in a row. So I'd say probably do something like, let's do it for 5 weekdays. Like during the workday, let me say, clear out some of the, let's make sure there's no fires, put those out in the morning. Let's say my first break of the morning at, let's say 10 o'clock or 10:30, I'm going to give myself, 15 to 30 minutes. I would decide on that. And then say, okay, that's when I'm going to do it. I'm going to go on do not disturb mode, and I'm going to go and here's the thing. Then I've got to play. Oh, okay. See, I'm getting excited with this. Even if nothing else, that could be the time where I go and watch. Oh man, my friend sent me that YouTube video on this interesting thing, but I don't want to be distracted by it. Well, that's my permissive time to go and watch it, and then go down the rabbit hole of what other videos are there. And then there's a timer and it goes off and I'm done. But, and I can pick up there tomorrow, or if somebody else sent me something, but that's my permissive time to go and deep dive on those things.
I love that. I actually do something similar. So I have something that I called my curiosity inbox, where I save all of those links for later.
Great.
So anytime someone sends me something interesting, but I can tell I'm going to fall into a rabbit hole if I click on this, I put it in there. And then I have dedicated time where I'm allowed to do that. And so for me, that's usually on Thursdays where I have an hour in the morning because that's before I start writing my newsletter. And quite often, something in this inbox is going to trigger what I'm going to write about that week. So it's actually a really good time for me to allow myself to explore and read things that might lead to falling into a rabbit hole. So I absolutely love this. This is actually an amazing example of a tiny experiment because you can do it for 5 days. And at the end of the 5 days, you can adjust the parameters of the experiment. So either it was great the way it is and you just keep going and this is fantastic. Or you can say, actually, you know what? Having it in the middle of the day was really hard to get back to work afterwards. So what about I put it at 4 p.m. where I know it's going to be a bit harder, but then I can do a couple more emails afterwards. I'm just going to wrap up the day, bit of admin. It's okay if I can't focus anymore, right? Or you can say, you could notice that it actually gives you a lot of creative energy. You're quite excited. And so you say, maybe not at lunchtime. What about I do that with my coffee in the morning? I have that half hour with my coffee in the morning, and this is putting me in a really good mood before I go to work. That's going to be different for everyone. And so that's why it's nice to start with a very tiny version of the experiment, complete it, see how you feel, and then adjust or keep going if it just works the way it is.
Yeah. And I think the thing that you stress here is there's no one way to do this. There's no perfect way to do. In fact, you say we should be doing intentional imperfection when it comes to this.
Exactly. It's really all about paying attention to the signals. I would say the only way to do this wrong is to cling to a specific outcome. That would probably be the only way to do this wrong. As long as you just show up, you do the thing, you accept the fact that it is probably not going to look like what you expected. It is going to be a bit messy. It's not going to be perfect. As long as you do this, and just like a scientist, you observe the result without any self-blame or self-judgment, then it's working. There's really no wrong way to do this.
Yeah. And that goes back to that thing we were kind of talking about earlier, where we kind of go in and we're searching for that one way, the way. There's only one way. So it's the way for our life, for our goals, for our planning, and that's clearly broken and follows this linear path versus this kind of ever branching off options that allow us to be truly curious and find things we wouldn't have found if we didn't get off that path, in other words.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's why some people who might be looking for a very prescriptive, rigid framework might be disappointed in reading my book, actually, because this is really not what it is. It's a series of tools that you can use to design your own tiny experiments. And the way this is going to look is going to be very different depending on your current context, your current priorities, what you're curious about, your ambitions, your relationships. All of that is going to influence the way you conduct your experiments and the kind of results that you're going to get. And this is part of it. This is kind of meta, but you can even experiment with the way you run your experiments. You can decide, like, are you someone who likes taking notes and you want to take lots of notes while you're running your experiments? Or maybe actually you don't like doing this and maybe you just want to do it with a friend, and maybe you catch up every couple of weeks over coffee and you share how your experiments are going, what you learned, your failures, your mistakes, and what you could learn together. Maybe you want to do it in public with other people. Maybe you're a bit shy and you want to do it in a very small WhatsApp group with a couple of colleagues. So there's no fixed framework for this. It's really about figuring out what works for you.
Well, you mentioned earlier OKRs, and I forget what the other one was, and I'm glad I don't have to think about it as much. What was the other one?
KPIs.
KPIs, yes. Earlier you mentioned OKRs and KPIs, and those are kind of, anybody who's been in that structured kind of business environment or again, has been in that structured kind of goal setting and, oh, did we reach the goal? No. Well, what they're already, even the way they're approaching it, even though it's more structured, is doing this. It's just much more of a macro marathon type way to do it that really wears you out. I always had a problem with, I'm going to do this thing. Here are our goals for the quarter. And then we're going to go through the quarter and we're going to check in times throughout the quarter, see where we're at, make adjustments, and then get to the end. It's still all it's so much more focused on the structure that makes it kind of, I mean, it's not that it's not beneficial, but I'm saying your way is more beneficial because it's smaller and less daunting.
Yeah, and the issue, I've seen it when I was working at Google, is that because there is still this very binary relationship to success and failure. So either you reach that goal or you don't, right?
Yes.
Quite often, because you're encouraged to set pretty ambitious goals, you actually don't reach them. What I've seen, what was very common, is then spending a lot of time and energy trying to justify why it didn't work out and kind of almost like pointing fingers, trying to find a culprit for why this thing didn't work out. When you have an experimental mindset, then it really changes that relationship. Something didn't work out. Great. We learned something. What can we learn? What are we going to do differently? And I do believe that you're going to end up learning and growing faster when you have that mindset versus having those artificial milestones that you very rarely reach, and then trying to find someone to blame for that failure that you automatically created because that goal in the first place was probably impossible to reach.
Yeah. And it's all based on, again, the Kronos of it, the rigid time structure of it, because we think, well, that's how you measure it. But it comes to mind BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals from, I forget his name, but it's Good to Great. I forget the author. I'm sure I'll remember it in 5 seconds or 5 minutes. I was in an organization where we went through that book for that reason. And it was inspirational and it had its point to it where, no, dream big, dream about what more possible than what you think is possible. And that is a good thing. And I think you'd agree with that. But it's when it comes to like OKRs, you have this thing where it's like, okay, we're going to set the goal at an unrealistic level so we can aspire to and, put in more effort to try and reach it. But inevitably, I never saw anyone, even when they weren't my goals, I didn't see the department's goals or the team's goals or even someone else's individual goals ever meet it, ever. And yeah. or meet the falsely inflated higher version of it. And so I think the key here, I think if I hear you right, you're saying you can run so many more experiments and complete them and have actual data in a shorter amount of time over that same amount of time in a quarter that you would be doing these OKRs.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
I love it. I love this. I mean, because honestly, I freaking hate OKRs. I just, after doing them and at least 2, if not 3 organizations when they were kind of brand new and everybody's talking about them and doing them. Are you familiar with OKRs? Yeah, we did them in the last company. And then I'm like, turns off camera. Oh my gosh, we're doing OKRs again. So let's just say I don't really love it, but I do love this approach. I would love, there's so much more in the book and I want to make sure that this gets into the hands of a lot of people. It's out now already. I want to point people to the book, your newsletter, and everything else you're working on, because your approach is exactly how I think it resonates with me, and I think we should be moving in this direction.
Thank you so much. So for anyone who wants to read the book, it's called Tiny Experiments. And you can either go on my website, tinyexperiments.org, or just look up Tiny Experiments anywhere books are sold, including your local bookshop if you want to support them. And for my newsletter, you can go to nestlabs.com/newsletter. I send it every week and I write about a lot of the topics we discussed today.
Perfect. And I thank you so much for being here. I am so glad that we were able to make this work and chat. And I can't wait to see what you're doing next. And we'll all follow along in the newsletter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation on tiny experiments with Anne-Laure. And it's definitely one of those books you want to pick up. This is one of my top 5 currently. People ask me for a productivity book. This is one of the ones I'm telling them to grab. Endorsements. And if you found something helpful out of this podcast, I would love for you to do me a favor and share this episode with somebody. Think of something that you learned and then think of somebody to share that with. Share it on over to them from the share button in your podcast player app of choice or wherever you're listening to this, or head on over to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com. That's where you can find links to all the sponsors to support this show or productivity tools that I use myself and use to create this show, often with pretty decent discounts. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next episode.